Hey again, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Discussions of Darkness. This week I wanted to touch on something that I feel like we often forget about, and it is a very important part of the setting. It should be an important part of our games, but it tends to fall by the wayside, or we tend to fall into the trap of thinking that the characters we're playing, the societies that we're a part of, are far more powerful than we think that they are. And in short, I wanted to discuss the Masquerade, why it exists in the world of darkness, and to give a couple examples of precisely why it is mortals are not to be messed with, particularly when they are messed with en masse. To begin at the beginning, for folks who have played any World of Darkness game, you already know this. This is for those of you out there who may be new to the setting, new to the genre, and you're familiar with the basic premise, but you haven't read through any of the books. But every version of this game has its own version of the Masquerade. But that's the term specifically used in Vampire, which is vampires pretending to be humans so that no one comes looking for them, no one attempts to hunt them down and exterminate them. In Werewolf you have it, in Changeling you have it, it exists in Mage, it exists in Promethean. Every single game understands that when you are a monster or a supernatural creature, you need to keep your existence secret from the populace at large. And generally speaking, the reason this is put forth in the historical parts of the game is when knowledge of what you are, when knowledge of really any supernatural creature has become widespread, this has led to purges by the mortals against the supernatural community. For those who played Old World of Darkness, possibly the largest historical setting books we got for this were during the Inquisition. So while it didn't shy away from the fact that a huge number of people were killed over political and religious reasons, it inserts the question of what if some of those witches were witches? What if some of those werewolves were werewolves? Or at the very least were part of a werewolf community. They were kinfolk to the werewolves. And that is a point that not a lot of people in the supernatural community have forgotten, and there are some that are particularly long-lived, since we have vampires as the main book, who remember these times and remember the sheer threat that they existed under. And this does a lot for us as players and as storytellers. As an example, if you are a storyteller, this gives you an inherent limiting factor to a lot of the games that you're running. Because players, as I have mentioned before in a lot of these videos, have access to some ridiculous abilities and powers. Whether it's pushing items through time, whether it's disappearing from sight, whether it's controlling the minds of onlookers, you can do some nuts things when you are a supernatural creature. However, you need to do those in a subtle, secret way so that people on the street, people you're just walking by or who may casually be in the area, don't see it, so that security cameras don't pick it up, so that witnesses don't start sharing stories about all of these impossible things they've seen and the populace at large doesn't know magic is real. And that gives you a lot of leeway, particularly if you don't want to take really powerful abilities away from your players, if you want to give them those toys to play with, but at the same time, you don't want them using them to solve every single situation that comes their way. So this gives you the ability to select the arena. So if you have players who are going into whatever the pocket dimension for their particular creatures happen to be, if you're going into the hedge, or you're going into the umbra, or you're going into whatever one it happens to be, that's the place they can really cut loose. They can use all of their nonsense, ridiculous abilities to overcome the plot, to overcome the villain. But if they're dealing with a local gang in the real world, if they're trying to figure out how to get the cops off their communities back, if they don't want the feds to come sniffing around, those are usually not the abilities that you rely on. You don't want to be throwing around your flashy powers, because when that happens, you tend to make the problem worse. Not only that, but when you have this agreement across all the various different spheres, you can have it enforced in different ways by different people. And it can play into different aspects. For example, if you have, say, a changeling community that's getting a little too free with their powers, they're getting a little too weird, stuff starting to circulate in the rumor mill, you're going to have not just their own community of people who are telling, their monarch telling them, you need to be more subtle, you need to chill with how much you're using your glamour, your powers are starting to get attention. You may have envoys from other communities who are hearing these stories, telling them, like, you all need to calm down, because if hunters come for you, hunters come for all of us. So it may start with changelings who don't know how to be subtle with their powers, but it may grow into, hunters coming for the vampires in the area, hunters coming for werewolves who are trying to mind their own business in this vicinity. A breach of the Masquerade for one is a breach of Masquerade for all. And while you all may have your various different beliefs on things, you all may have your own plots that you're chasing and your own things that matter to you, that is a problem that can unite a supernatural community and that can very quickly be an issue. So if you needed a simple plot, chasing down people who are not respecting the fact that they need to keep these things on the down low is a pretty good plot to have your players just thrown at, because then it gives them an enemy that is putting everyone in very real danger, but at the same time they can't escalate to their level without committing the same crime they were put on this plot for. But to redirect, the reason the Masquerade exists, aside from story conceits, aside from just giving the storyteller a way to limit the ridiculous expenditures of power and to try to make players think around corners and to be more subtle with their solutions to problems, is mortals are way more dangerous than we tend to remember. There's a particularly great plot in the comic Fables, anyone who's read it would remember, where you have your villains from another dimension who have come here and they're laying out their evil plot for how they're going to take over the world, and our character we're seeing it from the hero side, they've captured Pinocchio, of all people. It just laughs in their face as soon as they explain what their plot is, because he just realizes they do not understand the sheer spite of humanity, nor do they understand the raw, insane power of a modern mechanized military force. And this is a very good example of why the Masquerade needs to be maintained. As a good example, I was running a Changeling the Lost LARP a little while ago, as I've mentioned a couple of times. One of my players had a very large Fey mount. It was essentially a flying, fire-breathing dog the size of a horse with appropriate health levels to match. Toto was not to be messed with. However, when the particular squad of changelings were given the task of raiding a gang hideout, there was a fetch in there. And they just busted through a door, and they found themselves surrounded by 3 goons. Not well-trained soldiers, not magically endowed people, not even other supernaturals, just 3 regular gang members who happen to have shotguns, one of the most bargain basement weapons you can have when it comes to firearms. Within 1 round, these 3 people nearly reduced one of the heavy-hitting allies on the board to chunky salsa. A single shot placed well against a PC is enough to end them if they are not properly prepared for it. And even if we take guns out of the equation, being hit by a car does an absurd amount of damage. For those who are wondering, in the World of Darkness, or at least in the Chronicles of Darkness rules, because World of Darkness rules were not as complete, if one gets hit by a semi-truck, just moving at their normal clip, they take over 20 levels of bashing damage. That is enough to kill a huge number of creatures in the World of Darkness, and it is enough to kill any PC I've ever seen on the board, even with armor and protective measures. Those are just 2 regular examples of stuff you can walk into just laying around in the setting. Just getting thrown onto a highway and getting hit by a car can end your character in an instant. Doesn't matter if you're a 10,000-year-old vampire. That would be really interesting. I don't know if any of them are that old. But still, a vampire that is hundreds of years old, that has amassed massive amounts of power, can be taken out by a Ford. You know, a werewolf with all of their glories and all of their power and all of their regeneration, all it takes is a single shotgun blast to the face with some silver pellets, and they're down for the count. And that's before we bring in any truly ridiculous, impressive military hardware. Very few things in the setting could survive being shot by a tank. Yeah, there are some powers, obviously, that could protect you from these things. There are ways that you could dodge, that you could alter time, that you could armor yourself. But usually you can't do these all the time, forever. And the examples I gave are just against individuals or random chance. And these are not even particularly special individuals. Now imagine your relatively small supernatural community having to go up against the might of a modern military. Not even a small country like Ukraine, and just the massive amount of success they're having right now. Imagine any supernatural community having to stand up against the US military in all its numbers, with all its absurd machinery. There are very, very few scenarios where that works out well for someone. And working out well in this case is usually just, you didn't die. Now add into just the training, the manpower, the weaponry, the fact that if that scenario happens, hunters are going to show up and they're going to explain to the troops what it is they need to do. They're going to let them know all of your weaknesses, and they're going to let you know exactly how you can be taken out. Very few of us can survive an artillery strike, and that is basically the purpose of the Masquerade. That is the push, that is the punch behind it. Because the supernatural community nearly died when humanity was still using swords and crossbows. And they all know this. They all remember this. It's been passed down as wisdom of people cannot know about us. If they do, this will be the result. The angry mobs will come, and we will have to flee for all of our power, for all of the things we are capable of. We cannot stand up against a world that knows we exist and is free to come for us. And that is something that I feel a lot of the time, either we as storytellers don't drive home, or we as players just forget, because 1v1, sure, we can take out basically any mortal there is, unless they are very well trained, very well prepared, they know exactly what they're dealing with. We usually win. But numbers matter. And the more numbers the mortals have, the harder and harder it is for you to survive. And it is really important to drive that home, because people shouldn't just be afraid of whatever the monster du jour is of your particular setting. They shouldn't just fear the Elders Awakening in Vampire. They shouldn't just fear the Black Spiral Dancers in Werewolf the Apocalypse. In Changeling, they shouldn't just be afraid of the True Fae. They should be afraid of humans knowing what they are. They should be afraid of humans trying to purge them, because that is one of the major threats of the setting. That is one of the major problems of the end of your community scenario that all of these communities are trying to simultaneously avoid, to the point where it's entirely possible that if you needed some political issue to unite warring supernatural factions, the knowledge that what is happening might leak out into the real world could actually get them to agree to a ceasefire long enough to figure out what's going on. And too often we just forget about that, in the same way that we just kind of forget about the mortal world because we get so caught up in the nuances and the fun little odds and ends of the supernatural that the mortal world just kind of falls to the wayside. And as I mentioned in one of the earliest videos in this series, that means that you're essentially neglecting half or more of the game, because it's not just the freedom to play a vampire, to play a werewolf, to play a changeling, to play a Promethean or a mage. It's that thorny bit of navigating the mortal world, the human world, figuring out how do you live in a place that you don't belong, but that you can't let people know you don't belong. Otherwise, you're going to be facing significantly more problems. But that's my ramble for this week. Hopefully it's inspired some players and storytellers out there. If you have a particular topic that you have found of interest when it comes to the World of Darkness, please leave a comment down below. Let me know what things you want me to cover in upcoming episodes. And more than that, if you have a particular Masquerade breach that you think is very, at least funny, but at best educational for other people to read and to take in, maybe they want to avoid something at their table, or they want to use it as a plot for their own games, leave that in the comments too. I want to hear about it, and I'm curious to see when things have gone really wrong in your games. But until next time, happy gaming, everyone. Thank you for staying to the end of this episode of Discussions of Darkness. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking the video and sharing it on your own social media to help boost the signal. And if you'd like to help us keep the show and channel going, don't forget to hit that subscribe button as well. If you have any questions about the topic I covered today, or if you have something you'd like to see covered in a future episode, make sure to leave it in the comments below. Lastly, please check out the link in the video description to browse all of my World and Chronicles of Darkness supplements from Azukail Games. So far, we've covered Changeling the Lost, Vampire the Masquerade, Mage the Awakening, and Geist the Sin Eaters, in addition to a handful of general supplements that will be useful for any game set in the World or Chronicles of Darkness settings. Thank you in advance for your support. You're the ones who help us keep the lights on, so we don't fade into the shadows.